welcome to the show. I'm Aurora Winter, and you're in for a treat today. My guest is the one and only the amazing Michael Stockham, and he's got a story to keep you captivated, so hang on for that. He is a powerhouse in the legal world, and he's becoming a superstar in the publishing world as well. He's worked for over 2 decades as a prestigious lawyer with the big law firms, but now he has branched out to becoming a best-selling, award-winning author of legal thrillers. His first best-selling book is Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer, and he's followed that up with a series of 9 legal thrillers, the first one of which is called Jake Fox Ties That Blind. Like the wordplay there? Kind of fun. So today we're going to talk about something really surprising and interesting, how a convict changed a lawyer's life and his literary career. Whoa, I want to hear about that. So, and how did he go from arguing court motions to penning bestsellers? And how did a bank robber change his life in a surprising and interesting way? Well, stay tuned for that. But first, Michael, welcome to the show. Would you mind just introducing yourself briefly?
Sure, no problem. Thanks for having me, Aurora. I greatly appreciate the opportunity. Like you said, I've been a big firm lawyer for a little over 2 decades now. I originally wasn't supposed to be a lawyer. I had started off wanting to be a poet and a short story writer, but needed to make a living right around the time that I got married. I live in Dallas, Texas with my wife, and I've got 2 kiddos. One that's graduated Clemson and working in Atlanta in PR, and my other one is going to be a nurse soon. She graduates in about 12 months. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. I see you're a family man. All
Yes.
right. So take us back to this unlikely friendship that changed everything at the very beginning of your legal career. So tell us about this first pro bono case that you did and what happened.
Sure, absolutely. Glad to tell you the story. So I was a baby lawyer, which means I was very young. I was within the first 2 or 3 years of actually being licensed. I started working my way up through the associate ranks at my firm. And prior to being at a firm, I had clerked 1 year for a federal judge in Dallas and had struck up a friendship with one of the magistrates here, Judge Irma Ramirez, who now currently sits on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Wonderful woman, brilliant legal mind. But at that particular point, she had a prisoner case, a civil rights case, prisoner who had sued to receive proper health care treatment in a prison in upstate Texas, in North Texas. And he had made it all the way to trial. The problem was that he was confined in solitary confinement 23 hours a day, 7 days a week,
Ow.
wouldn't be able to prepare for trial. So they needed a trial lawyer to jump in at the last minute. And so she called and asked if I would take this case on. We were about 90 days out from trial. And so myself and one of my great friends, who's also a partner at the firm I work with, Dave Schulte, he and I shouldered that case and took it all the way through jury verdict.
And for the benefit of those of us who aren't lawyers, what does pro bono mean?
So pro bono just means essentially for free, without
So,
charge. Uh, it's oftentimes it's a huge component of a legal career. The bar associations, the national associations, even the Supreme Court talks about the importance of lawyers who are relatively privileged in society, giving back to those and providing legal advice and assistance to folks that are less fortunate, don't have opportunities to hire lawyers. And in this case, to help out Edwin Kimbrell, my prisoner, who's named Emmett Kendrick in the book, to help Edwin out in a time when he had been very successful litigating it on his own. He was a very brilliant jailhouse lawyer, but he needed a lot of help to take it in front of a jury, and Dave and I were very pleased to do that.
all right. So basically, you're fresh out of law school, more or less, and this is your very first case, and you're doing this for free as part of giving back to society, as part of what lawyers do. So take us back to the moment where you first met this bank robber. What
Yes,
was your first impression of him, and did that change later?
Yeah, so when we first met him, we sent him a couple of letters and then finally made our way up to the prison, the state prison in Iowa Park, Texas. And when you first arrive in prison, this is the first time we had been involved in anything like this. So when you approach and go in, um, you have to go through the metal detectors. It's obvious that you're lawyers. Everybody else is in a uniform or jeans. You're the only people in a suit and tie with a briefcase. You're not really welcome. I mean, anybody that works the prison system seems to have a jaundiced eye against lawyers coming in because generally the lawyers are going to have some sort of criticism with how they run the prisons. And prison is a pretty tough job. It's a very hard thing to do. So they don't really want people poking around. They don't
Mm.
take kindly to that. So it's not a real warm welcome. Um,
That
but we
sounds
were
like an
able,
understatement.
yeah, it was very interesting, but Edwin was in what Texas calls administrative segregation, which the rest of society called solitary confinement. So he was in the most secure section of the prison, which means that you have to be led back from a guard. The guard grabs you at the visitor's entry, if you will, and then leads you through the general population section. Then they lead you through high security section, which is more dangerous inmates on different types of lockdown, but they have a lot more freedom. They have a propensity for violence, but they can be maintained in a different way. And then you go to administrative segregation or solitary, and those individuals are one person to 8 by 10 cell, 24/7, pretty much. They get out
Wow.
for recreation in essentially what you would see on a farm as a dog run. It's just a long cage with fencing on all sides except for where the door is. And they spend about an hour outside.
You'd think that would make you go crazy. But anyway, talk us through what happened next when you first met Edwin Kimbrell, who is loosely the inspiration of the convict in your book, Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we went in to meet him, the visiting section was somewhat what you might expect to see in a Hollywood film. It was essentially a series of phone booths, if you will, where we were going to meet up with Edwin. We were on one side of a thick bulletproof glass window, and he was on the other. There were phones hanging. He had one, we had one, and they brought him in. Now we'd never seen him. Uh, Edwin had been convicted probably in the 70s or 80s. So it wasn't like there were lots of pictures of him on the internet that we could go find out what he looked like. And when they bring him in, they open the back door. He's shackled and manacled at the wrists, waist, and feet. They undo his feet manacles first and his waist manacles, and then he steps into the booth with his handcuffs. And then he bends down and sticks his hands through a slot in the door. The guard closes the door with him inside, and then he sticks his hands through, and they undo his handcuffs. And then he's unrestricted, but in sort of a 3 by 3 little cubicle, and he picks up the phone and begins to talk to us.
They're really treating him like a very dangerous person. And what was he? A 6'6", 300-pound muscle guy?
No, Edwin was all of about 5'5", 5'6", maybe 160 pounds soaking wet. He had been convicted of a violent crime. He had robbed a bank with a gun many decades prior to that. And in his time in prison, he had had some altercations with other prisoners. Generally, he stayed to himself, didn't really want to engage with other people. He was more happy to read books and do other things. But uh, prison is a place full of challenges and challengers. And
Mm.
so he did have some altercations with some folks, and the wardens had written him up as, potentially violent against the guards, et cetera. Now, he did never have any incidents with the guards, but because of his prior acting out at a different prison 10 years earlier, they had set him in administrative segregation and decided not to move him. And I, to a certain extent, suspect that his continued incarceration in solitary confinement had a lot to do with his efforts to secure proper medical care for his heart condition, the grievances that he filed against the guard, not necessarily the guards, but the prison physicians and the deputy wardens. And ultimately, I don't think he was ever going to get out of solitary confinement once he filed suit against the state and everybody to push the issue.
So how old was he and what was his complaint?
So Edwin was probably 74 or 75 when I met him. He had been through two open heart surgeries. They had cracked his chest twice for a pretty damaged heart, and they had done multiple bypasses and fixed him at least twice. And his main complaint was that most of the drugs that are post bypass, cabbage, if you will, cardio arterial bypass, uh, those are required to maintain one uh, rhythm of the heart, blood flow to the heart, etc. And then he suffered a lot from angina because of the weak heart, so he needed nitroglycerin to calm down those angina attacks to make it the pain go away, if you will. And he was having a very hard time getting that provided to him on a regular basis. Um,
So the medicines and nitroglycerin, et cetera, that he required to maintain his frail health was not being delivered to him reliably. Is that correct?
100%. Yep, very good cross-examination. You should be a lawyer yourself. But that is exactly right. Yeah, the medicines were not coming on a regular basis. He was having a hard time getting the nursing staff, particularly the director of nursing, to pay attention to get those on a regular basis. And without a steady stream of certain drugs, he would suffer more and more angina attacks. And without a steady stream of nitroglycerin, he would essentially have to suffer through those attacks until they dissipated on their own. And angina attacks can be very painful.
Wow. So what did you think of him when you first met him? And did that perception shift over time?
Yeah, so it shifted somewhat immediately because we had been told we were going to meet a very violent felon who was in administrative segregation, who was locked down all the time. And in walks Edwin, who looks more like sort of the little old man you might buy stuff from the hardware store. I mean, he did not look threatening at all. Uh, in when before we had gone to the prison, we both had extreme respect for Edwin. He had done something that really very few prisoners do. Most prisoner complaints and a civil rights complaint he had filed under the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution. And so it was a federal court case. And most of those get dismissed at what they call the motion to dismiss stage, where the judge decides that the prisoner hasn't even pled a claim or he didn't go through all of his administrative remedies in the prison system, so the claim wouldn't be ripe. And so he had been dismissed once by a district judge here, Judge Buckmeyer, and taken Judge Buckmeyer up to the Fifth Circuit and got him reversed,
Hmm.
which was impressive enough because he did all that writing by hand, typing by hand on a manual typewriter from a jail cell.
Did he have any legal background or how did he know how to do that?
No legal background, all self-taught jailhouse lawyer, and not having access to a prison library either. So Edwin would have had to ask for certain documents for certain cases, certain materials. They'd be delivered to his cell and then picked up a little bit later, etc. So he had to do it in a very slow-paced, snail's pace fashion.
He had to be very determined. And it sounds like one of the things that you suspected almost immediately is that part of the reason that he was in solitary confinement was kind of as payback for being a bothersome prisoner and complaining.
Absolutely,
What
absolutely.
is the Eighth Amendment?
So the Eighth Amendment is one of the amendments to the U.S. Constitution's Bill of Rights, and it protects prisoners from cruel and unusual punishment. You hear it all the time. It's very, very big in death penalty litigation as to
Hmm.
whether or not the death penalty itself is cruel and unusual, and then oftentimes you see attacks on the methods of execution. Lethal injection sometimes is argued that it's cruel and unusual because of the cocktail of drugs that they inject, which is usually in a 3 or 4 stage system. And they could talk about the pain that those drugs cause and or the panic in the prisoner, et cetera. And
Mm.
there's debates on both sides, but that's generally what it is that if you're going to, as a society, lock people away and take away their freedom, then you don't also get the right to then treat them inhumanely.
So when you took on this pro bono case, this free case as a baby lawyer, practically fresh out of law school, did you think that he had a reasonable case for the Eighth Amendment? Do you think that he was, in fact, facing cruel and unusual punishment? Or when, if not at the beginning, did you at some point? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so we did believe that the case was meritorious. I mean, it had been a long history of not providing these materials or excuse me, it's been a long history of not providing these medicines. And, the more we got into it, we were lucky enough, Dave and I, that we had a paralegal in the firm that wanted to work on the case who had been a nurse before she went back to paralegal school. And she started pulling articles about these particular drugs and what the withdrawal symptoms would be or what it would be like. And so we started to learn more and more about just the difficulties, the pain, the panic that he would be going through in a isolated cell during some of these attacks. And they were completely preventable if the
Mm.
medicines had come on a regular schedule. We also felt that Judge Ramirez would not have allowed it to go to trial. I told you that Dave and I were a bit of a fanboy of Ed when even we got before we got there because he had gone to the Fifth Circuit and reversed Judge Mike Buckmeyer. But by the time we got a hold of the case, he'd actually done that twice. He'd lost in the district court twice, and taken it to the Fifth Circuit and got reversed twice. And then by the time we arrived, he had already fought numerous discovery battles against the state attorney general's office, won all of those on motion, and in fact won one of them so directly against bad conduct by the AG that the judge sanctioned that particular lawyer and required him to attend 2 days of ethics training uh,
Wow.
to get out from under it. So Edwin had been when we got there, we realized he was going to be very, very smart. We realized he was very determined. He had done all of this from isolation in a cell with really no access to like a law library or anything that we were used to as practicing law. So we were very, very excited to meet him because we knew we were going to run into somebody very intelligent.
Sounds like a total outlier. I mean, how many have you had any other experiences with somebody in solitary confinement doing that?
No, not with doing that. I've had other experiences with people in solitary confinement, and very few of them are as charming or as rock solid as Edwin was. There are
And
people
what
that deserve to be in solitary confinement. I'm not a bleeding heart liberal or someone that just is anti-prison, et cetera. Those prisons are set up and those cell blocks are set up for a reason, and most of it is safety related to other prisoners and other guards because a lot of violent offenders that end up there deserve, they do not want to live in any rules of society, even rules of a prison. And so it's very difficult. The prison guards' jobs, the staff's jobs, very difficult and very dangerous. And so Edwin was a complete anomaly. He was very unique, and Dave and I knew that from the beginning.
interesting. So just to circle back for the benefit of the listeners, what does AG mean?
Attorney General, Attorney
Cool.
General's office.
So thank you. What lessons did you learn working with this convicted bank robber? Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so we'll just start off with one that continues to affect me to this day. Um, he was incredibly optimistic,
Hmm.
um, charming, and had an incredible sense of humor about his whole situation. He was also very reflective. So he knew he had no problem whatsoever serving out the rest of his sentence. He was fully accepting of the fact that he had robbed the bank and that that he deserved to be convicted and incarcerated for his crime. Um, he just wanted to, he had no, you and I take for granted if you feel bad or something's wrong, we go down to the pharmacy and pick something up to address the symptom. Or if a doctor writes the script, we go get it filled at the corner pharmacy. He has none of that. He has only the ability to get a script and then hope that the prison system follows through for him.
Mm,
But even with all of those sort of handicaps on his daily being or daily vibe, he was very, very optimistic about things. And he was also very appreciative. He was stunned and we were stunned. We had expected to run into sort of a brash, know-it-all um, person coming from a place of anger, if you will. And he expected to be represented by two know-it-all lawyers that didn't really have time for a prisoner. Um, and we were able to that friendship we were able to form was really amazing. A real connection between human beings who couldn't have been further apart in their life arc than we were
mm.
with Edwin.
That's interesting. Was there a moment that stands out to you as particularly moving?
Yeah, so 100%, probably the most dramatic point, and this is during trial. One of the claims that Edwin had brought, in addition to the not getting his medicine, was a complaint that he needed to be transported in a different manner. Um, they would oftentimes need to take him to the hospital, which was a 2 or 3 hour drive to a prison hospital in a different city. And they would shackle him in a way that pulled on his sternum, on his chest. And that particular joint was relatively weak. I mean, sternums grow back together, but they are, his had been cracked twice and wired back together. And so it would hurt if he was put in certain positions, and he was asking for an accommodation so that he wouldn't be shackled in that manner. Uh, and so during the trial, um, we had Edwin come down from the witness stand. He had been in the witness stand for a couple of hours testifying, but we actually had one of the prison guards there shackle him right in front of the jury the way that he gets transported. And there wasn't a sound in the courtroom. Everybody was, I don't think they would say stunned because we see that stuff on TV all the time, people in handcuffs or whatever. It was just different watching the complete subjugation of another human being in a courtroom. And I think part of what was shocking about it to everybody was that we had been successful in getting the court to allow us to buy Edwin a suit to wear a suit to court instead of a prison jumpsuit. Um, and so the jury had been watching him. We had been interacting with him. Everybody had been interacting with him as sort of this kindly old grandfather who was on the witness stand in a suit that anybody up there might wear to church. And to see him get down on the floor and kneel and bow his head and watch the officer shackle him up was really something powerful for the jury to see.
I get moved just hearing you describe it. It sounds so mortifying.
It is to realize that there's no, and then you kind of think about that's his day, right? Anytime he's moved, he's shackled like that. They don't move him through the hallways to the dog run. They don't move him to the infirmary. They don't move him to the shower, anything like that without being completely shackled up.
So tell us about the case. Were you able to get some witnesses? What happened? Were you able to represent Edwin to his satisfaction, to your satisfaction, and did you win the day? Can you walk us through the case?
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to. The We had 2 or 3 witnesses that went missing on us. So there were a couple of nurses who had quit working for the medical staff there at the prison. And somewhat they had quit because they did not like the way Edwin had been treated. That
Hmm.
they somewhat felt like the director of nursing had it out for Edwin and had it out for maybe some other prisoners. So they left. We knew that they would be pro witnesses for us, that we wanted them to come in and testify to those facts, because Edwin had given us a list of 9 witnesses that he wanted to call. all of whom were prisoners in different states of incarceration, from ADSEG down to general population, and all of whom we interviewed and found to be incredibly difficult to put on the witness stand.
Not your most impressive witnesses if they're also convicts. Yeah.
Yeah, so rather than try to traipse nine guys through in prison jumpsuits to say that that being in prison sucks, we thought we would go find several. We would go find people in the community or these nurses to testify, and they had disappeared. They didn't want to be found. It took us a long time to try to find them. We searched all over the internet. We searched through records. Ultimately, we found I left a message for one of the nurses' mothers on a it wouldn't have been a cell phone at the time, probably her landline, um, and asked if we didn't want to bother her, but if she would mind talking to us and about Edwin if they would call, and she did call us back and told us exactly what we thought had happened, and said that she would get in touch with the other nurse. And we ultimately met with them at a Mexican food restaurant for lunch right before trial and walked through their testimony, and they were willing to go on the stand. So they
Whew,
were incredibly helpful. They
that
were
was,
incredibly helpful, yeah.
hmm. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you,
No,
but
no, that was all.
that must have been very important to get those witnesses to agree to be witnesses. And what happened next?
Yeah, well, trial took place. Of course, the prosecutor came in. She prosecutes prisoners all the time, so she was not in any sort of charitable mindset. She was perfectly happy to have him lose. And we started trial. We picked a jury from about 100 people. They called in 100 jurors for us to select from because this town, Iowa Park, is outside of a small town or smaller town, not a Dallas-sized town or Chicago-sized town, but Wichita Falls is in North Texas, and it has essentially two prison systems. So it's a high population of folks that work as correctional officers or prison guards or in police, big state trooper outlet, etc. So it was going to be very, very hard to find people that were not connected to law enforcement or connected one way or another to the prison system. And that we thought would be problematic because I can tell you every prison guard has nightmare stories on a weekly basis from dealing with
Mm,
prisoners. So we needed people that were going to be open-minded, if not empathetic. And so that was fun, picking a jury from such a large group. And then we put on our case. Edwin did fantastic. He did the best he could. Um, After we closed it, I think we had, everybody in the courtroom, even the prosecutor or the district attorney or, yeah, the attorney general that had been trying the case. I think they thought we had a chance of winning it. They were worried of losing it. Ultimately, we did not win. Um, I think part of it is because of not people being biased, but I just think that people aren't predisposed to give a prisoner a win. It would have
hmm.
to be a really severe case uh, of damage, etc., which we can talk about in a minute. But we didn't win, but Edwin won. He was all smiles through the trial, not because he was smirking about dragging or harassing the prison staff, etc., but he had worked so hard to have his day in court and just tell his story to unbiased non-prison officials to try to get his to try to have somebody listen to him, which is just such a big component of somebody that's suffering one way or another, is just feeling heard. And so he was very pleased with the verdict. He didn't, afterwards he told us that he did not expect to win, but he had been very victorious in being able to tell his story and casting doubt on some of the actions of the medical staff that they had not treated him right. And so he was pleased. He was very pleased.
That shows what an extraordinary human being he was that he responded that way. How did you feel when you lost the case?
Uh, Very disappointed. I mean, no trial lawyer likes to lose. Um, that's always feels tragic. I try to remember that you learn more from your losses than your wins, which is certainly the case in trial law.
Hmm.
There's an old joke that every trial lawyer's best cross-examination is on the way home. Um, so, um, we felt disappointed, but in the end, we felt like if Edwin felt that he'd won, then we'd been good advocates. We'd done what we were supposed to do, was to get him to feel like he had been heard.
Right. So you did succeed in professionally representing him and also caring as a human being. So how did this case change you right at the very beginning of your career?
Well, I did not expect it to do that. I expected it to be sort of a one-off, just a little pro bono case that we would go do stuff with. But it had a profound impact on me. Um, from a technical standpoint, it accelerated being a trial lawyer, understanding what needed to be done to be, actually in the arena doing it. 97% of all cases settle these days.
Hmm.
So actually getting in front of a jury, picking a jury, knowing how to do stuff with witnesses, that's all stuff that you learn by doing. And so it was a great gift to be able to have such experience to be the first chair in a federal court jury trial as a second or third year associate. That was huge. But from a human aspect, there's probably very few weeks um, and sometimes very few days that go by that I still don't think of Edwin some 22 years after that case.
Wow.
Um, his optimism, his humor, the things I learned, sometimes regret, which we all have once in a while. But it was really impactful, and I feel blessed for having the experience and for having met him.
Tell the story about how you got his suit.
Sure. So we won the order, won the motion to get him to have a suit, and we were faced with the actual logistical problem of how to figure out what size he would need. We were going to go down to just J.C. Penney in the mall and buy a suit, but Edwin didn't even really know his size much. I mean, he'd been in prison. The last time he'd worn a suit to church, he was in his 20s or
Hmm.
30s, so um, we had to figure out a way to try to to measure him, to almost like take measurements that you would for a tux or anything like that, like a tailor. But they would not let us near him. They would not bring him out of the prison or out of the visitor's room to be measured. The guards refused to measure him or to assist in any way. They basically told us it was our problem, and if we could figure out how to do it, then that was fine. If not, then they're not going to break the prison rules to help us. So we came up with the idea of tearing up. We had legal pads on our side of the window, and we tore out several sheets, a dozen sheets of paper, if you will, and then started tearing them in as best we could in sort of 1 inch strips or 3/4 inch strips in a spiral. And we ended up with this dozen spirals or whatever. And we asked the prison guard to pass that through into Edwin, and he did. And then Edwin would take a spiral and wrap it around his neck and tear it off, and he'd write down that was his neck size. And then we coached him how to do his inseam and his arms and his shoulders and his cuff and his waist. And we took those dozen scraps of paper down to J.C. Penney, and the guy looked really excited when we walked up because he thought Dave and I were going to be buying a suit for us. And I dumped those out and said, "No, I need a suit to fit this." And so we spent the afternoon or the evening at J.C. Penney and figured out a suit that would fit, a shirt, a tie, all that stuff, shoes. And we were successful. It fit really well. We were
That's good
pretty good,
problem solving.
pretty good jailhouse tailors.
How did Edwin feel when he first put on a suit after having worn inmate garb for so long?
He was he was joyous. He was absolutely joyous to be seen, and some of it was just the fun of being outside of the scratchy prison uniforms and fatigues he'd been wearing. But I think part of it also was just to be seen as a regular human being for a few hours a day for a week,
Mm.
um, to be out amongst the public as much as he was, to be viewed as something other than a number, a stencil on his back. He was very grateful for that. And he looked really good. I mean, he looked.
Well, you went above and beyond to make that happen. So what happened after the case closed? What happened to Edwin? Where is he today?
I received so after the case closed, he we exchanged a few letters back and forth, et cetera. And then I was in my office one day and received a call from the Attorney General's office that Edwin had passed away from a massive heart attack. And it was probably only 2 or 3 weeks after the trial. It was so close to the end of the trial that even the Attorney General was a little nervous that it seemed uh,
Hmm.
too coincidental that he would have such a heart attack. Um,
Did
but
you think it was
ultimately,
retribution in some way?
yeah, we had some concern that maybe they perhaps had overstressed him on purpose or they had withdrawn his medicines in a significant amount on purpose. We were very concerned that something may very well have happened to him.
Hmm.
And we still can't rule it out to this day. I mean, there's really no evidence of it. Um, no evidence either way that they did or did not. We know that he had been transported pretty quickly after they were thinking of transferring him out of that prison down to another prison in West Texas. And that's where he had the massive heart attack in the emergency room down there and
Hmm.
passed. Um, where is he today? He's in a prison uh, cemetery somewhere. I don't think he has a headstone. He probably has just a granite shank driven into the ground with his prisoner number on it. I don't think they mark him
Wow.
particularly well, but I don't know exactly where that is. Probably in Huntsville, Texas, which is
And
where a lot of the that type of activity takes place.
and where is his blue suit?
Still hangs in my closet. Um, I don't wear it. It's still in a bag. I mean, it's still in the sort of a protective bag, but I just every time I think about trying to give it away for somebody else to wear or do something through charity or getting rid of it, I just can't. It just still hangs out. And the knot and the tie is still tied, all that stuff.
Hmm. He really had lodged a place in your heart. So that
Absolutely.
I know your first best-selling legal thriller, Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer, contains more than this pro bono case or the roots of this pro bono case because your book is fiction, but there's a story, a court case inspired by Edwin Kimbrell's story. Why did you decide to include that story in Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer?
Well, I think it was important. It's an important story to tell. It was an important story for me to tell so that it didn't disappear
Hmm.
just in my memories with others. I mean, Dave remembers it well. Other people were impacted by it, but I wanted it to live on. I wanted it to live on as a testament to the human condition, to Edwin's optimism. It's not written as a screed against the prison system. That's not the main purpose of it. It's more of a celebration of being able to find friendship, kindness, and interesting people in the circumstances where you would never ever go looking for it. And that was important for me to put down on paper.
Well, honestly, it's also a testament to who you are, that your heart was open to seeing who he really was, in spite of the fact that he was in solitary confinement, in prison garb, in rather wretched circumstances. So it speaks highly of you too, Michael.
Well, thanks. I mean, I hope it does. I hope it also inspires other people to take on pro bono cases. You know, when you talk about pro bono in the giant business of law,
Hmm.
a lot of lawyers do it perfunctorily or they groan, oh, I have to put in my pro bono hours or something like that. But, these cases that the Edwin case and others that I've been involved with since, you really get a chance to interact with folks you would never interact with, and you get a chance to learn lessons and be taught lessons that you wouldn't otherwise. And so I think pro bono is more than just being charitable by a lawyer or giving up a few hours. It's really an opportunity to learn a whole lot from folks in completely different circumstances, whether they're in prison or if you're helping, a single mother with kids try to get a divorce from a deadbeat husband, or fighting evictions, or helping someone who can't afford legal services start their very first LLC because they want their own business. I mean, you can make a big impact on people and they can make a big impact on the lawyer. So pro bono is a big deal and should be a big deal.
I like how you're pointing out that the benefits can really go both ways. You
Yes,
impacted the convict enormously, but he also impacted you. And I think it's usually that way when we give without seeking anything in return, the grace flows and we get something very surprising as a miraculous return, or that's been my experience.
I
How
agree.
have how have readers responded to Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer? Have they been moved by this pro bono case? What kind of response have you received? I know you've won a bunch of awards for Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer. I know it's got over 3,000 reviews, so people really love the legal thriller part of it. But has it touched or moved your readers, do you think, in the way that you wanted them to be touched and moved?
Yes, I think we see evidence of that. I mean, in some of the reviews that you see on BookBub or Amazon or other places, um, there are definitely comments of folks that are very, very intrigued by and moved by Edwin's story, and the friendship between the lawyer and the inmate. So
Mm.
I think it does have impact on people. It's one of the things I love most. It's one of the things I like about writing is characters. I mean, to me, characters are the whole deal. It's not just even in spy thrillers or other types of thrillers where you would think it's all just about fist fights and shoot 'em up. I think that books that really, really have great characters uh, impact people and last longer. And the response we've gotten off of those characters has been pretty amazing. People have really related to the baby lawyer character and also to the inmate. And that's been very, very humbling as well as rewarding.
Also, there's a whole plot line we haven't even gotten into with the baby lawyer's wife and her wishes for a big family and difficulties with pregnancy. So, can you talk a little bit about, for the benefit of the listeners or watchers who may want to become authors, can you talk a little bit about storytelling and shed any light? You obviously have to tell stories and be a compelling communicator in court. Did that help you writing legal thrillers? And can you talk a little bit about the transition from, I don't know, very boring documents, I imagine, to really interesting legal thrillers?
Sure. So the core theme or thread through any communication really is story. Um, for very legal-based motions, which you would consider very dry and full of case sites and things like that, there's not really, some people would say that there's not really place for storytelling in the law, et cetera. But I'm a firm believer that storytelling is the number one thing that you're trying to do. You're trying to communicate information. And I think human beings understand and receive information in a much more efficient way and retain it in a much more significant way if you can tie it to a story. Um, it's one of the absolute key components of any time you're if you're arguing in front of a jury to non-lawyers, then it's very, very important to tie things into a story so that they can remember. Um, for example, in a jury trial, some jury trials are short, some are long, but say just a 2 or 3 week jury trial, if the judge doesn't let the jury take notes, then they're to remember everything that they've heard and seen from all the witnesses and all the evidence over a 3 week period. And unless you're able to weave a story together or put components of character on different aspects of the actors in your case, then they're not going to remember what you want them to remember.
Mm.
Um, and so it's a very, very core function of being a good lawyer is learning to tell a good story to be a trial lawyer.
Perhaps it also makes you more perceptive about people. Do you think that it helps you create compelling characters?
Absolutely. I mean, all of the characters I write, if you look at them, certain of them have different aspects or characteristics of people that I've lived with or around or who've impacted me. Um, so yeah, absolutely. The law and the series of characters that I run across in practicing law greatly influences the type of characters that I actually write in fiction.
So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about your new series about Jake Fox. The first book is Ties That Blind, which I quite like that word play. How did you come up with that, Ties That Blind instead of bind? It was kind of cool. Sort of, it's a little legal thrillery-esque fun word play. You like the word play. So talk about shifting to this new series and what you hope to achieve with the Jake Fox series, how it might be similar or different from Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer.
Yeah, so um, I didn't want to be done writing books. I mean, that's been something that's been an inspiration for me before I ever left high school was storytelling.
Mm.
Um, and I'd written in the mornings and other things, probably wrote two very terrible novels tucked in a drawer somewhere uh, before. But I really wanted to continue on with writing and doing something, continuing to explore and enjoy the idea of creating characters, creating a setting, creating um, a world, if you will.
Hmm.
The idea of doing a series appealed to me because you got to live with the characters longer. I'm I just think that if you're going to undertake a project like that, every character in the book has to arc some way or another, no matter how small. And there's a couple of ways to do that. One is to write a 1,200 word novel, which I didn't want to do. And the other is to take that series of characters through a number of different adventures through a series. And so that was very interesting to me. Um, it's not inspired by a true story. That that was a deliberate choice, part of a freeing choice, if you will. One
Hmm.
of the things that was difficult about Confessions was I had lived every day that I was writing about. So I got stuck sometimes between being historically accurate and doing something that would work well for the book.
Right. You have to condense things.
Well, not only condense, but you have to, change. Not everything can be 100% accurate. You're not writing a biography, you're writing a legal thriller. So this was freeing in a significant way because the characters could be whatever I wanted them to be, whoever I wanted to be, um, and behave in interesting and fun new ways. So that's part of it.
So this
To set it,
the sound got a bit wonky there. Maybe you could just repeat that.
how far back?
You're not writing a biography, you're writing a legal thriller.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the problem, not the problem, but one of the difficulties in writing Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer was the fact that it was inspired by actual true facts. So that makes it difficult sometimes to divorce yourself from what actually historically happened to what you want to happen in the book. And that can be kind of a writer's block to a certain extent. But you're not writing, a biography, you're writing a legal thriller, a work of fiction, so you do get to play some. But in the new series, with no inspiration from the real world except for a character here or there, which is just their personality, not the actual day-to-day events, that was incredibly freeing. That's been a lot of fun and very, very exciting.
So what do you hope to achieve with Jake Fox Ties That Blind, the first book in the series?
Well, I hope it's a success. I mean, I do like that, but I think, one of the most rewarding things when writing a book is somebody tells you that they enjoy it. And not only that they enjoy it, but they start telling you their favorite parts or what they really enjoyed or what stood out or um, and that's really rewarding. because that's the whole purpose of story is to touch other people, either to excite them or to make them feel a certain way. And so when you get that kind of feedback, it's wonderful. And so I don't want to stop writing. I'd like to just continue writing. I don't plan on passing away anytime in the near future, so I'd like to just keep putting out books.
John Grisham, watch out. Michael Stockham is coming through.
Perhaps one day.
Well, your books are page turners, and I could talk to you all day, but we need to wrap this up. How can people get a hold of you? And before you tell us that, do you have any final words, things you didn't get a chance to say that you'd like to add?
No final words. Just thank you for having me on and talking about the book and about Edwin. His story is deeply personal to me, so the chance to tell it's always a joy for me. People are welcome to contact me any way they want. I have a website, michaelstockham.com, and they can also email me directly at michael@michaelstockham.com. I'm happy to chat anytime.
Well, this was a real pleasure, Michael. So go out and grab yourself a copy of Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer by Michael Stockham, who's been my guest today, and grab his new book, Jake Fox Ties That Blind, and start reading the Jake Fox series of legal thrillers. If you like John Grisham or James Patterson or authors of legal thrillers, you're going to love Michael Stockham's books. If you want to hire him as a lawyer, well, you can go check michaelstockham.com or you can visit him on LinkedIn under Michael Stockham. And I've been your host today, Aurora Winter, and I really hope that this has benefited you. I know I've been really moved by hearing this story, and thank you for sharing it, Michael.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, bye for now.